next year will be a turning point. I know it, the point when Ukrainian courage and American resolve must guarantee the future of our common freedom, the freedom of people who stand for their values.
Well, that was Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking before a joint session of Congress this week. And during his surprise visit to Washington, D.C., Zelensky also met with President Biden at the White House. This is his first trip out of Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion 304 days ago. The visit also coming as U.S. lawmakers passed a $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill, earmarking $45 billion of that money in aid to Ukraine. For more on Zelensky's visit, let's welcome in retired Air Force Brigadier General and Newsmax contributor Blaine Holt. General, welcome, and we appreciate you being with us. I want to begin with just your initial reaction to Zelensky's appearance in Washington and maybe what types of conversations were happening behind the scenes.
Well, it's great to be with you, and Merry Christmas. But one of the things that struck me the most was it was very audacious for him to get in an airplane and pre-announce that he was coming to the United States. This is typically not what heads of state will do if their country is at war. There's so many risks with assassination, and yet he was able to get here safely and he was able to go back. And we shouldn't make too little out of that. That actually tells us that the Russians probably couldn't capitalize on that opportunity along with the rest of their military failures. But he came here, he made a great speech. He advocated for his people. He advocated for the resources that he needs. And I would imagine that behind the scenes, you probably had a lot of strategic talks about where does this war go? What are the potential scenarios for closure to the war or escalation? And then probably some cautions about some types of weaponry not being used in certain ways that actually could make this an escalatory situation.
Yeah, and lawmakers, of course, signing a very big check for Ukraine. There are billions of dollars in taxpayer money. We heard Zelensky talking about you can speed up our victory. But when it comes to sending advanced weaponry, President Biden warned about the consequences during a joint press conference that he had with his Ukrainian counterpart. Let's take a listen.
The idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world.
General, do you agree with the president's assessment?
I do. There's several complications here. First off, the alliance also has to be comfortable with what types of military support is given because that's their region. They're on the hook for whatever happens in the escalation of the war or the de-escalation of it. But quite honestly, some of this technology we really don't want to be getting into enemy hands. You can't, have small diameter bombs and say that none of them will fall into Russian hands for examination and then eventually into Chinese hands. So we have to be very careful about how they get the support that they need. That in no way implies that they shouldn't be getting more HIMARS, more radars, more ability to intercept these drones, more ability to intercept missiles, because the Russians are intent on weaponizing the winter and destroying this grid. And in fact, Putin he's already said he's going to raise the cost imposition quite substantially with hypersonics.
And I guess I would ask you what you make of the timing of Zelensky's visit. How much of this perhaps has to do with the fact that, the Congress, again, the war has now entered its 304th day just today. You have concerns perhaps that a Republican majority in the House, Ukraine aid may be a bit more questionable. What are your thoughts?
So I think that this idea that just because Representative McCarthy had said this is not going to be a blank check, they're going to support the Ukraine war. And I think that the consensus generally in both sides of the aisle is that there will be financial support for the war. It's just there will need to be scrutiny, examination, and transparency. That is not a counter-Ukraine statement. That's a pro-Ukraine statement. If we husband our resources, we can actually do more. The timing of the trip is very interesting because it's against the backdrop of this very contentious, inflation-causing, liberty-wrecking $1.7 trillion omnibus. And we should not confuse the two. They did not have to sign the omnibus in order to get Ukraine aid. That's ridiculous. They could have just done a CR, some emergency funding. And by the way, that $45 billion is not until next year anyway. We've only spent 22 of 40 authorized so far. So none of that theater really plays out. We could have just kept on supporting Ukraine without this. And the only way you'll support them is if you get this omnibus, which is going to really hurt the United States quite substantially, actually.
Yeah. Great points. General Holt, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Great
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas. Yep.
No crooked establishment.
None of that twisting the
truth.
No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax.
Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think.
They
Let me decide.
Newsmax.
Real news
For real people.